Good evening and welcome. Kalispera in Greek, so this is a kind of international gathering today, so I thought of welcoming you with the Greek word for good evening, which is Kalispera. I'm Zoe Kosmidou, representing UNIC DC, so I'm here to introduce myself and UNIC, and of course the speaker and the honored guests who are here with us today. So first of all, thank you for coming. And second, I would like to thank the very beginning, NYU DC, the Bradamas Center, that is very kindly hosting our events, UNIC's events, this year. We started earlier in March with another wonderful project named Peace Kitchen, Make Food, Not War, which was very, very successful. And based on that success and very productive collaboration, we thought of continuing our series with a very new project that is not so new. It has already started in early October, October 8th. We had the first event of Iconoclash, which was brightly and brilliantly put together by my colleague Wilfred Eckstein from the Goethe Institute. And the Goethe Institute is a member of UNIC DC. So for those of you who don't know what UNIC stands for, it is the acronym for the European Union Institutes, National Institutes for Culture. So what UNIC is and means? UNIC DC especially was founded in March 2011, and UNIC in general is a coalition of EU member states, National Institutes of Culture, that works across a global network of 80 cities, from Brussels to New Delhi, and from Moscow to New York, and apparently to DC as well. The UNIC cluster in Washington aims to present edgy, creative, diverse, and thought-provoking cultural and educational programs to showcase Europe in Washington, DC, and not only, because we do have cultural institutes around the United States. So I want to be very brief. I want to thank again NYU for this wonderful, fruitful, and thought-provoking collaboration. And I would like to introduce, it's a pleasure and an honor to introduce Ambassador George Tsakalis, who has very graciously supported this event, our speaker of today, and the whole event, and UNIC DC in general. So Ambassador Tsakalis, please give us a few words.
Good evening, everyone. The painful images that recently circulated of the destruction of Palmyra in Syria and of Hatra and Nimrud in Iraq are a stark reminder to us all of the gravity of cultural cleansing and how terrorist organizations like ISIL have no moral boundaries and will not stop merely as a result of public outcry globally. The aim of ISIL's cultural cleansing is basically twofold: a perverse ideology to uproot the cultural and ethnological connection of local populations from their land by conducting cultural genocide, while at the same time also amassing mass profits from illegally trafficking cultural and religious artifacts. Although there is a legal framework against the looting and illegal trafficking of cultural heritage, nonetheless, the prevention of the sale of such artifacts from terrorist groups and organized crime networks, as well as the return of these artifacts to their lawful owners, are almost impossible tasks. Yet this is exactly what Tasoula Hadjitofi, tonight's keynote speaker, was able to do and has been doing for the past 3 decades. Tasoula Hadjitofi, herself a refugee from Cyprus, has since the 1980s been fighting to save cultural, religious, and artistic treasures that have been illegally looted. After the 1974 Turkish invasion of Cyprus, thousands of cultural artifacts and religious frescoes, mosaics, and ecclesiastic murals were smuggled out of the occupied area of the island, ending up on the international art market, at auction houses, and in the hands of unknowing art collectors. Tasoula, who was at the time Cyprus's newly appointed honorary consul in the Netherlands, was approached by an art dealer to buy stolen treasures from her own homeland. This immediately spurred her into action, and through tremendous zeal, research, and orchestration, Tasoula's actions had led to one of the largest cultural trafficking sting operations in history, the famous 1997 Munich case, whereby some 5,000 pieces of looted artifacts, most of which were not Cypriot, were confiscated. For this pioneering achievement, Tasoula became the first woman to be awarded the highest honor of the Church of Cyprus, the Gold Medal of the Apostle Barnabas. Since then, Tasoula has become a fearless advocate for raising awareness of the importance of cultural heritage and of the need to protect it, but specifically the necessity to combat art trafficking worldwide. Towards this end, she founded the Walk of Truth, through which she has been tirelessly campaigning to establish an integrated way whereby all stakeholders, from international organizations to legislators, auction houses, and law enforcement agencies, can cooperate and work together to stop the plundering of cultural heritage from organized terrorist and crime networks from illicitly profiting, as well as to safeguard ethical trading in art and antiquities. I'm deeply honored to be here today to introduce one of the most prominent voices in the world of combating art trafficking, and I very much look forward to her insightful and fascinating presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Tsakalis. In addition to the wonderful presentation that you did about our keynote speaker, I am also going to introduce Dr. Matthew Douglas Adams, who is a senior research scholar at NYU's Institute of Fine Arts, where he's also associate director, field director of the IFA's long-standing archaeological field project at Abydos, Egypt. Abydos suffered significant looting during the 2011 uprising in Egypt, and Dr. Adams has led efforts both to document the nature and extent of the looting damage and in collaboration with the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities to develop local initiatives that aim to build a more secure future for the site. Dr. Adams holds a dual PhD in anthropology and Egyptology from the University of Pennsylvania. So please join me to welcome our two speakers for the day, for the evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and especially in such esteemed company. The site of Abydos, Egypt, is situated on the west side of the Nile River, about 300 miles south of modern Cairo. Anciently, it was one of Egypt's most sacred places. As the primary cult place of the god Osiris, ruler of the land of the dead, it was a religious center of national importance, and for many centuries, a place of religious pilgrimage. It was also the burial place and likely ancestral home of Egypt's first kings. For many years, NYU's Institute of Fine Arts has been engaged in a broad program of archaeological field research at Abydos, an expansive site consisting of the ancient city, a number of major temples, and vast desert cemetery fields. One of our most important initiatives has focused on the investigation of a series of mysterious monuments built by Egypt's first kings. Each consisted of a massive mud brick enclosure wall that defined an interior ritual precinct, which you see here in reconstruction. This one belonged to King Aha and dates to around 3000 BC. The IFA project's work has demonstrated the existence of a long series of similar monuments at Abydos, now mostly reduced and buried. The ritual enclosure appears to have been the singular monumental project of each king's reign, as was the royal pyramid subsequently. In studying this sequence, we're able to observe the development of a material vocabulary through which early Egyptian kingship was expressed, and with it, how the Egyptians defined the role of king and the nature of royal power. Fundamental questions for understanding early Egyptian society and culture. As sleepy as this somewhat remote site in a quite rural area may seem, the Abydos project situates NYU directly in the middle of the global issue of threats to cultural heritage. I think all of us here are probably familiar with the events in Egypt in early 2011. As protests against the Mubarak regime developed and escalated, and the response from the state became increasingly violent, the general situation became more and more uncertain. Eventually, President Mubarak stood down, and Egypt seemed poised for a more hopeful future. With the fall of the regime, however, the nation saw a general stand-down of virtually all security forces, creating a vacuum in which anything could and did happen. The impact at Abydos was immediate. Freshly dug holes began to appear across the site. Our staff reported that multiple gangs of looters were coming onto the site every night. Some from the modern villages, some from the desert side roads and tracks. Sometimes there were as many as 15 or 20 people per gang, and some of the gangs were armed. They threatened our unarmed site guards with bodily harm and even death if they remained at their posts or tried to interfere in any way. By day, the evidence of these nighttime efforts was all too obvious. Large pits and scatters of displaced and broken bricks showed that looters had hacked into buried architecture, mostly ancient tombs and funerary chapels. Sometimes these were mixed with broken pottery and human bones, once the contents of the tombs. Our local manager, Ahmed Rageb, on the left here, and the overseer of the workforce, Rais Ibrahim Muhammad Ali, remained on the ground and were in a position of having to deal with this new, unanticipated threat to the site, initially with no support from local security authorities. I was in regular contact with them from the States and was at times on the phone with Ahmed when incursions by looters were happening in real time. Our first response was to bring on as many additional guards as we could, to have as great a physical presence on the site as possible. Eventually, we had around 40 guards, which included a rapid response team of young men who could quickly reinforce our regular guards in responding to new incursions wherever they occurred, harassing and trying to drive off the looters. Our staff also organized a campaign of nighttime deception. Shots fired by starter pistols, like the one I'm holding here much later, and flare guns sounded and looked from a distance in the village like police weapons firing. Our site guards marching in step around the site and loudly calling out a cadence and Yabasha gave the impression that the police were being led around the site by their officers. Without a real police presence, though, any unarmed effort at stabilizing the security of the site could only have limited effectiveness. For many years, the police had stationed an armored personnel carrier near our field house, affectionately known to Abida's teams as the Tank. With the general security stand-down, the APC's presence was irregular at best, and the officers in charge unresponsive to ever more urgent requests for help. With no tank visible, the looters knew the police were not present and that the site was vulnerable. In desperation, our staff attempted an audacious plan of subterfuge. A mock tank, a shell that would fit over a small SUV and could be driven around the site at night. With that, people in the village started talking about the police are back. Through the combined, incredibly brave efforts of our expedition staff, together with supportive local authorities, the situation at Abydos was eventually brought under control. Since that time, at the request of the Ministry of Antiquities, we have maintained an enhanced security posture, and large-scale looting has not resumed. We do see occasional attempts, but these are successfully intercepted. That these attempts happen at all means that the looters are still there, watching and waiting for the opportunity to come back, probing for vulnerabilities. Since some of the looters knew our site guards by name, sometimes calling their mobile phones to warn them away from their stations, we can be certain that at least some, if not the majority, came from the adjacent villages. A subsequent ground survey, after the situation was stabilized, found evidence of more than 200 looters' pits, all of which had been dug in a period of about 3 weeks in early 2011. Given our experience, we're confronted by the question of how this could have happened. Economic hardship and even simple greed are without doubts parts of the answer. However, perhaps the most fundamental contributing factor is the unfortunate fact that the thousands of people who live in the villages next to the remains of ancient Abydos have very little sense of connection to the site or of its value, other than through the village folklore that characterizes the place as filled with buried treasure. An attitude that, from their perspective, begs the question of why such places should be reserved for the benefit primarily of foreign scholars and tourists. An essential component to the long-term solution to site security in places like Abydos is in fostering a greater sense of connectedness to heritage sites among the people who have lived with them for centuries. In my view, archaeological projects have no choice but to embrace greater engagement and social responsibility in the context of modern Egypt to help maintain their relevance from the Egyptian perspective and to broaden fieldwork programs to include education and outreach efforts aimed at building bridges between local communities and heritage sites as a way of helping to safeguard both Egypt's past and our own future. I would argue that local, on-the-ground community engagement efforts are essential components of broader global initiatives on protecting cultural heritage, aiming to create local contexts in which the value of heritage is defined as other than treasure to be extracted and marketed. Thank you. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Alexander Nagel, who is a research associate at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History. Since 2009, he has curated a number of exhibits and installations in the Smithsonian. He holds a PhD in classical art and archaeology from the University of Michigan. He has a special interest in cultural heritage issues and has worked with the Department of Homeland Security on illicitly traded materials. He is supporting the work of communities who document the illicit trade in antiquities, especially in places like Yemen. And this evening, he is the host for Tasoula Hadjitofi and is a partner in the Iconoclash program, of which we're benefiting tonight, especially on issues relating to illicit trafficking in cultural heritage. Dr. Nagel.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Matt, for this wonderful introduction. And I also would like to express my sincere thanks for everyone who came out on this beautiful evening in Washington, D.C. I would like to thank the ambassador, Mr. Kalispera, also from my side. In my very brief note, I will introduce Ms. Tasoula Hadjitofi. I would like to tell a little bit more than was already given in the introductory remarks. I met Ms. Tasoula Hadjitofi actually through Facebook about 2 years ago, so we had an interesting conversation, and finally it led us, thanks to UNIC, to Dr. Cosmido and to the Goethe Institute, to Wilfried Eckstein, to bringing Tasoula here this evening. And we had already a couple of meetings, and I found out Tasoula is really a tsunami. You can really judge by being in a room with her that there's so much inspiration coming for everyone who is interested in protecting heritage worldwide. She will talk about worldwide heritage protection, about the Walk of Truth project. And so what leaves for me to say is really she was born in Famagusta, as already was mentioned, in Cyprus, and had to leave Cyprus in 1974. She had extended stays in the UK and in the Netherlands, and is calling The Hague now as her home. And I think we can also be very grateful for the Netherlands for actually making a refugee welcome. So I think this is a particular interesting time also we have now of Europeans also hosting many refugees at this particular time. She was the honorary consul of Cyprus and has, as already been was said in 1997, been the main person behind the Munich operation, which had led to the recovery of 5,000 pieces, of which 350 pieces were from Cyprus, while the majority of the material came from regions around the world and had overall an estimate of $60 million. So these are really high financial values also that we are talking about here this evening. Ms. Hadjitofi is now talking about Walk of Truth, which got support also from the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. The idea of Walk of Truth is to engage citizens and leaders of the world to understand the importance of a dialogue and to recognize that the protection of our cultural heritage against the greed and corruption is a responsibility for all of us. Tonight, Ms. Hadjitofi will explore what can be done to prevent and combat this illicit trade of heritage materials, particularly from the Middle East, and she will share the lessons that she learned from her own experience of now 30 years of working in this field. She will talk how cultural heritage can contribute to peace and reconciliation in former conflict zones, and I thank her really for coming here for tonight. Please join me in welcoming Tasoula, and also thank you for the work that you have done so far. I hope there's many more years to come for Walk of Truth.
does freedom mean to you? War confused me. It destroyed my security and identity. Destruction of cultural heritage is happening across the globe daily. Extremism to be stolen treasures as a friend.
But I now think the first name is enough, because most of you are here due to her energy, drive and commitment to bring this issue to the attention of parliamentarians and to government.
I want my artifacts back.
Have succeeded to uncover several icons, frescoes and mosaics.
And it justify our actions to buy and steal religious symbols because we have lost our moral compass. Together, we can go from talking to walking and create social change. I am a negotiator of peace, and I use cultural heritage as my currency.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so very much for being here tonight. And I begin by saying thank you to my cyber friend, Alexander Nigel, who was also the initiator of me coming to Washington, D.C. tonight. Of course, Mr. Wilfred Eckstein from Goethe Institute. I cannot forget the New York University, Tom McIntyre, and of course, Mrs. Zoe Cosmidou from the European National Cultural Institute in Washington, D.C. And last but not the least, Ambassador Chagalis and his wonderful team who also promoted the event. And thank you, all of you, for coming to hear my story tonight, not knowing me from the Netherlands, but I'm grateful to be with you. So, as we gather here in historic Washington, D.C., and acknowledge the cultural heritage of this city that symbolizes what freedom is to the world, millions of refugees and displaced people are fleeing areas in conflict. This is having an extraordinary impact on Europe as people head into the heart of the continent from zones in conflict and chaos in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, or North Africa. Many have fled hoping to find safety and a better future for their children. In Germany, whose language and culture are celebrated in this institute, they expect to take 1.5 million migrants this year only. Many of these refugees had hellish experiences, witnessing their place of origin, often centers of ancient civilization, reduced to bombed-out shells. They have suffered the destruction not only of their homes and businesses, but of the monuments, places of worship, and historic sites which gave meaning to their lives and connected them with their forebears. Now they must make a new life, uncertain of the welcome they will receive and disconnected from those ancient sources. For some refugees, there will be an extra twist to their pain. Even as they grieve for the precious cultural heritage which their communities have lost, sacred and historical, they may very well see antiquities or art objects looted from their countries of origin that are being sold openly to wealthy people in their new homelands by auction house or art dealers. Imagine, for example, being a migrant to Europe from the city of Timbuktu in Mali, an UNESCO World Heritage Site which was once the spiritual capital of a vast region. How would you feel as a displaced Malian if you saw ancient manuscripts or parts of a recently vandalized historic shrine from your home city being sold for profit to wealthy European collectors. The same implies if you are an immigrant or refugee from Egypt. Or put yourself in the shoes of a refugee who had somehow reached London or Paris from one of the towns in northern Iraq, where since last year the fighters of Islamic State have been terrorizing religious minorities and wrecking the monuments they hold dear. How would that refugee feel about seeing religious artifacts from his faith being traded by art galleries for cash? I know this is true because I am a refugee. I was born in Cyprus, an island, a country located in the Eastern Mediterranean, which has a rich and turbulent history that dates back to the earliest days of civilization and Christianity. I grew up in Famagusta, a city by the sea, once known for having 365 churches in its region, one to worship each day of the year. The Turkish invasion of Cyprus in 1974 destroyed all but 5 of these ancient churches and monasteries that played an important role in the lives of the Greek Orthodox. I lost my carefree existence as the child of an ordinary Greek Orthodox family whose life was defined by the Christian Orthodox faith, Christmas feasts, Easter barbecues, and family pilgrimages to cool stone chapels in remote mountains areas. These chapels were all covered from floor to ceiling with ancient beautiful frescoes, mosaics, or icons that focused our prayers. I was 14 when that world came to a violent end, and we had to flee westwards along the coast for our lives. To lose one's identity and freedom shakes the core of who you are as a human being. I was no longer known as Tasoula Georgiou. They called me refugee, my new identity. I left Cyprus at the tender age of 17 in search of a new future, first to the United Kingdom and then to Holland. As a young girl, I worked and paid my way to attend the university and send money back to my family in Cyprus who were counting on me. My sense of responsibility helped me to become a successful entrepreneur in my mid-20s when I founded a promising business in the Netherlands. My new adopted country gave me an opportunity to put my talents to use, and for that, I'm grateful to the Netherlands. Building my company, Octagon Professionals International, enabled me to be a job creator and challenge the discriminatory thinking of people who viewed refugees as economic burdens to society. To the contrary, we can be a wealth of untapped resources, anxious to contribute to our new country and always hoping to return back to our birthplace. Now that my business was successful, I found love, I got married, and was appointed Honorary Consul of Cyprus in the Netherlands, in The Hague. A unique distinction for someone of my young age, and I was the first woman to receive that honor. My life had finally become normal again, of the first time since the war. But not for long. I had everything to look forward to, but the wounds of war and dislocation were still bleeding somewhere inside me. The injustice of what happened to my country and to the people of Cyprus haunted me. As a young consul in 1988, just weeks on the job, I was targeted by a mysterious Dutch art dealer who wanted to sell information about looted religious artifacts from Cyprus in exchange for cash. He revealed shocking photographs showing me proof of the cultural cleansing that took place in the occupied area. I saw Byzantine icons of the kind that my family and I had venerated and loved, brutally damaged. The eyes of saints had been gouged out. Some were decapitated. There were pictures of mosaics from the 6th century Kanakaria church in the northeast of Cyprus, one of the world's oldest places of Christian worship, ripped from the walls. Hundreds of pieces of glass and stone fitted together to create images of Jesus Christ and his apostles that held great significance for Orthodox and all Christian people around the world, were drilled out of the ceiling and cut into bits. I began to identify with these artifacts and figures. They too had become victims of the war, taken from their spiritual homes and sold on the black market to people who had no understanding of their sacred value. Pieces of plaster were visibly crumbling at the edge of each image, hacked out of the church's stone walls with an electric drill in cold-blooded act of calculated vandalism. A premeditated act committed by some person or persons taking cynical advantage of the Turkish military occupation and the ethnic cleansing of the Christian population from that region. Whoever committed those terrible acts of vandalism was trying to destroy all trace of our collective existence and memories. The looters were not just trying to wipe away our past. They were trying to rewrite history, to erase the fact that the Greek Orthodox culture ever existed. Now, the following short video I'm about to play speaks for what the sacred treasures looted from Cyprus mean to the Christian Orthodox people. If I can find the right button. this is just one of the many lessons learned. As a young consul in The Hague, I became involved in a landmark court case that was taking place in the United States, involving 4 Kanakaria mosaics depicting Jesus Christ, an archangel, and the apostles Matthew and James. With the support of the Cyprus government, the Church of Cyprus waged a challenging legal battle for the restitution of the 4 pieces, led by attorney Thomas Klein, who is amongst us tonight. The 6th century mosaics were purchased by an art dealer in Indiana who was proposing to resell them to the Getty Museum for $20 million. As an honorary consul, it was not my job to retrieve looted art. However, I made it my personal mission to retrieve information that would build up the legal case for restitution of these mosaics from the mysterious Dutch art dealer and his network. In the course of this difficult battle, I learned who the players were in the shadowy underworld of art trafficking and how they played their game. They were experts at finding the loopholes that existed in the law to avoid prosecution. I learned the difference between the law in the United States and in most European countries. In American law, it is a fundamental principle that the thief cannot pass on good faith or good title. So a person who acquires stolen goods may lose those goods, even if he claims that the acquisition was made in good faith. That is a very sound moral principle, and it has been a great help to campaigners for the restitution of stolen cultural treasures. You can be proud of yourselves. Bravo, America, for this. In most European countries, the law tends to favor the possessor, and it makes it possible to legitimize the acquisition of ill-gotten gains once a certain period has passed. There are statutes of limitations, and in my opinion, there should be none when it comes to cultural heritage. Another example of America's innovative thinking is the Menil case. Dominic de Menil of the Menil Foundation was offered stolen looted frescoes from Cyprus by a Turkish art dealer named Aydin Digman. De Menil, since the treasures were stolen, she purchased them in order to save them and contacted the Cypriot authorities on her own initiative. The Church of Cyprus and she came to an agreement. Menil would invest her own money to restore the damaged frescoes, and she would build a chapel to display them and share their story in exchange for a loan that would secure their stay in America for 20 years. I visited Houston, and I was quite moved when I saw the American people lined up to say goodbye to the refugee frescoes of Cyprus a week before they departed Houston for their journey back home. Here is a case where cultural heritage became an envoy of peace and reconciliation and diplomacy. My hope is that one day the Turkish government will allow us, the rescued frescoes, to safely return to their original home in the occupied area of Cyprus, where they once again can be freely worshipped. During my tenure as honorary consul and a representative of the Church of Cyprus, I was responsible for the repatriation of millions of dollars worth of stolen artifacts. I think I need that water. Sorry. I was responsible for the repatriation of millions of dollars worth of stolen artifacts. But it wasn't until 1997 that my years of hard work culminated in hitting the jackpot. In 1997, I gained the trust and cooperation of the same mysterious art dealer who first targeted me as a young consul. And with the support of the Munich and Cyprus police, we orchestrated what became known as the Munich Operation, which led to the arrest of Aydin Dikman, the Turkish mastermind behind the looting of Cyprus churches in the occupied area. This art sting covered over $60 million of stolen artifacts from Cyprus and around the world. In the press, they called me Jane Bond. But as you can see, I'm just a refugee, a girl from Famagusta, just an ordinary woman who was placed in extraordinary circumstances. But with 30 years of experience, some of which I shared with you, there were many lessons learned. I created an NGO, Walk of Truth, to bring these lessons learned to the rest of the world. Walk of Truth is an online platform for reporting crimes against cultural heritage worldwide during conflict. It is a smart advocacy and lobbying mechanism, a digital archive comprising 30 years of data on recovering antiquities. A Walk of Truth debate held at the Peace Palace, the International Court of Justice, involving a roundtable of experts from around the world. We analyzed the trade and restitution of stolen artifacts with real examples from Afghanistan and Cyprus. These were the major conclusions from our debate. Number one, there is no integrated approach to combating art trafficking, despite very good work done by individual organizations and stakeholders. Second, there is no vehicle for the public to protect cultural heritage, which could multiply resources overnight. Third, legal battles take years to be resolved, and the artifacts are kept in warehouse away from public eye. There is a need for a temporary home for homeless arts. We gave this feedback to policymakers. We also held a presentation at the House of Lords in London last December 2014. It was named Blood, Treasures, and Islamic State: War, Extremism, and the Looting of Culture. We had a full house, and the debate resulted in a proposal for changes of the terrorist bill in UK, plus the 1954 The Hague Treaty for the Protection of Cultural Heritage, where Prime Minister Cameron committed to ratify before the end of this year. In addition, the UK created an all-party parliamentary committee for the protection of cultural heritage, of which Walk of Truth is the secretary. The Mayor of London, Mr. Boris Johnson, sees London as the cultural center of the world and supports this initiative, but I am sure that you Americans may disagree with that. But now, where do we go from here? A new brand of terrorism has emerged from Islamic State to the fundamentalist fighters of northern West Africa. They have half destroyed the ancient city of Palmyra in Syria, one of the best preserved sites of the classical world, and used bulldozers to wreck the Assyrian archaeological site in Nimrud. In Yemen, irreplaceable parts of the world's religious and cultural heritage are being destroyed in a civil war, not by terrorists, but by well-organized armies, sometimes using weapons that they received from Western governments. Either our governments will rise to this challenge, or each country will try to solve its problems at the expense of its neighbors. Walk of Truth believes that the battle to protect cultural heritage can only be won by engaging the help of global citizens. Refugees and migrants, giving them an opportunity to fight back as peaceful warriors, using their knowledge of the monuments, art treasures, and antiquities, which are so close to their heart, and working next to the authorities. This methodology is much cheaper than any antidepressive. We are proposing to establish a digital platform called Cultural Crime Watchers Worldwide, which will make it easy for people to offer tips about trafficked antiquities with a guarantee of absolute anonymity for the information provided. Walk of Truth has a wide range of contacts in the world of law enforcement, authenticity experts, provenance experts, etc. And we will use their expertise to validate the anonymous tips so that we prepare a pre-investigation file for the right authority to act upon. By establishing Cultural Crime Watchers Worldwide, we hope to turn those who feel helpless about witnessing the demise of their cultural heritage into agents of positive change and into people who can fight back against the destroyers and looters of their homeland as instruments of peace and reconciliation. We need your help. I have come here today in search of experts, technological and financial partners, plus volunteers. Join me. Become a cultural crime watcher in whatever way you can. We offer many different options for you to become involved in this progressive movement to create a positive change in the world we live in. Become involved. Help us to reverse the vicious cycle of fanatism and greed, which is destroying the world's heritage. Let me leave you with the thought that you have the power to make a positive difference in this world. And I invite you to take action and walk with me. If I can do it, so can you. Thank you so very much for your patience. So when you come this way, you don't only lose your sleep, but you lose your voice.
I hope that you haven't lost your voice completely. We have another bottle of water there. We now have the opportunity for questions. I'm sure that there are many.
Could we take one question from the internet? What is the role, in your view, of the private sector in protecting cultural heritage?
The private sector, well, I think that the world we live today of extremism is a place where we have an obligation to engage each and every citizen to fight extremistic elements in our own environment, whether it is religious groups, ethnic groups, or values groups. And I believe that a culture or cultural heritage must stop being exclusive to the elite, to the academics, and the wealthy. As long as we look at it like this, we will never have enough resources. Once we understand the value it has to the public, to the people, then we can engage them and we can mobilize them to have a role in protecting and defending their own cultural heritage.
This fits very well with our experience in Egypt. The problem in our instance came from this point of disconnect, where the antiquities sites had for many years been managed as the essentially exclusive purview of scholars and for tourism, but without any particular relationship to the local communities. And they're the stewards, ultimately, of this place. They live there. They've been there for centuries and will continue to be there when we're long gone. And the ultimate fate of this tremendous heritage site is ultimately in their hands. And by engaging them, mobilizing them to feel identity with, to be engaged with, and to feel that this place is theirs and is part of their future, this is essential.
Yes, I agree with you. But also, we have to be realistic. And when there is war or conflict, human life takes precedent. But, trust me, when it comes to peace and reconciliation, where trust is vital, respect for cultural and religious symbols is a must. You cannot create a peaceful coexistence in conflict areas if you do not respect each other's diversity of icons and idols. However, during the conflict, although, as I said, destruction of cultural heritage perhaps takes second precedent, what we experience now with Walk of Truth is that we get a lot of tips for looted arts or being on sale from the diaspora. So the locals will reach out to the diaspora and report what is happening. And it is the diaspora who comes to us and says, please help, this must stop. We don't want our cultural heritage to stay abroad. What can we do about it? Yeah.
I guess, say in the United States, when sauce was sauce with the I don't know, probably some British or but all through Mediterranean, our former boss, which are now Christian churches in Spain and Sicily, where the Islamic symbols were wiped over and obliterated. And often obviously predated the laws of the past century. Do you think that the example that Christianity set now serves justifying in the minds of a rising Islam treating Christian Western artifacts and houses of worship the same way that Christianity treated the Islamic and in such a way that nationalism and religious nationalism now caused Islam override its normal rule that Christian and Jewish, I guess they're all asking symbols and houses of worship are to be protected almost subordinately under the subject.
Well, thank you for this question. But I think also for my presentation, I have focused on art trafficking being a crime. And for me, it is a crime against humanity, whether you destroy a mosque, a synagogue, or a church. And the organized crime for art trafficking knows no nationality. And in Yemen, for example, but also in Syria right now, there are criminal rings that are digging, excavating illegally, and selling artifacts. And they are of all nationalities, and they are from also more than one place. So I do not believe that to sort of label just one place or the other, or to claim that crime is exclusive to one nationality or the other is correct. But we do see in certain times of history more extremism in one or the other. But that is, art trafficking is not exclusive to one group. But let me tell you another thing. We create the demand. There's something we can do. And rather than blaming each other, I think we have to stop buying them. Because if the more we buy them,
the more we create demand, and then there is more need of these fanatics, whether they are, to destroy them.
Could we take one question from the internet? In your view, could you comment on the effectiveness and role of the United Nations in stopping, protecting, and returning stolen heritage?
I didn't come here as a judge. I came as a speaker to offer you an innovative way to solve the problem. I am sure that there is a lot of concern with UNESCO, with the United Nations. There have been a lot of debates, and there has been a lot of time and resources put in thinking how to address this issue. But I think my view is that we will never have enough resources and we will never have enough money to address it unless there is an integrated approach. And that integrated approach has to engage the authorities, international organizations, NGOs, and the public. And together we can do it.
What would you recommend to audience members here, to people viewing us over the internet, who read the headlines about the destruction and illicit trade in cultural heritage, and really don't know where to turn, don't know what they as individuals can do? What would your recommendation to them be? How can they make a difference?
Okay. First of all, I like to say that in the press, we read every day about monuments men and women. But there are some real monuments men and women out there that are anonymous. They're volunteers. They're on the ground, and they're providing support and information, and they're tireless. So if any of the people here or over the internet, they wish to mobilize themselves, let them become cultural collaborators. Send an email to us at Walk of Truth, and we will utilize them. And not only that, they will find a network of wonderful human beings around the world who also know what is right and what is wrong. Less antidepressive.
Any other questions here tonight?
Yes. The lady on the back. Thank you for that. I think the trade, I am not a person who says that we have to stop selling artifacts and we have to empty all the museums. I don't come from that place. But I do come from the place of making clear that there is a difference between illicit art trade and ethical art trade. And I think that we perhaps should have the debate about what is a code of ethical conduct for auction houses, for art dealers, for galleries. And also, I think it depends on the individuals, on the collectors, of their own social responsibility, because there's no legislation that says that if you have a lot of money, you can buy cultural heritage, as long as it's not looted, and keep it for yourself. Now, is it correct that you are not obliged to display it for others to see for a certain time of the year or not? I don't know, but perhaps the time has come where we should have that debate. Yes, lady? Well, most of the time it's not the locals who sell artifacts, but they are criminal rings, and these criminals are, or their acts are related to other crimes, such as weapon selling, oil trafficking, and drugs. That sometimes when there is poverty and you don't have food on your table, you might think that this is an easy way to get cash. But the majority of the looting is not done for that purpose. But even then, if there's no market, they will not do that. So we have a lot to say, because that is also a way to exploit the locals in their poverty time and take their goods. In my case, because you spoke about me being a refugee, I come from the town of Famagusta, and I don't know if you know about it, but I come from the closed city. There's a part of this city that for 41 years is closed. There's a wire around it. It is a secret of the world, but nobody enters there. Our cups are on the table since 1974 when we left. Our pets in cages waiting for us to go home. And there are monuments there that nobody talks about it. So for me, because I cannot go home, I kept on bringing the artifacts back home. So that was my healing process. It was my way of dealing with the injustice country. And perhaps being different in the Netherlands and in the UK where I were, it was more, who am I, what am I? And then it was easier for me to identify with my cultural heritage, my religious artifacts. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for that question. But I wouldn't call them Algian marbles. I would call them the marbles of Parthenon. But I think that the marbles of Parthenon is a very special case. And it is a special case because they have left, they're not portable artifacts. They have left a monument handicapped back home. So I believe that the time has come, and I believe the world is much more sensitive to the Parthenon marbles going back home. And I believe they will go back home. But to go back home, we also have to look. We cannot judge with legislation and values of today with what happened many years ago. Because if you look at the Parthenon marbles, I believe that the British will give them back. But they will give them back not via legal route. Because a legal route has one winner and one loser. I believe that if there is behind the scenes facilitation, mediation, they will give them back. But they will give them back in a way that they will not lose faith. Perhaps we, the world, we should nominate the British Museum as the museum to be the one for homeless arts. And they're doing a lot of good work, the British Museum in Iraq right now and Syria, restoring and looking after artifacts, and they're even training people on the ground. And perhaps if we have a room in the British Museum where they can hold temporarily all of these refugee or homeless arts, it might be easier for them to give back the Parthenon marbles. And I would campaign for that. Any other questions? Oh, yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they will, because during our debate in the House of Lords on 16th of December, Baroness Lady Berridge and also the MP David Burrows, who organized this with us, they have committed to challenge the parliament, and they asked the question on the 16th of June this year at Prime Minister's time whether the UK will ratify the 1954 treaty, and the Prime Minister committed to ratify it before the end of the year. So be sure if he doesn't, we'll remind him. Yes? Yes. Yes. The intangible cultural heritage. When you look at national borders, they change every time there's a conflict, or most of the time. When you look at intangible cultural heritage to be guarded by national legislation, that means you are putting the responsibility for cataloging, preservation, restoration to the one who holds the title of deeds at the time. How often did we hear cultural heritage belongs to humanity? Well, perhaps we should start acting as such. And that means countries where they have less funds or they don't make it priority to catalog or make 3D databases where the world can see what exists where. Perhaps it is the time to see how we can empower locals to restore, preserve that cultural heritage in the spirit that although the title of deeds is with them today, throughout the history, they do have ethnic or religious or historical value to other minorities or to other ethnic groups. Yes. Okay, thank you. Well, it's interesting to say whether there is a link with the wildlife and the cultural heritage. We're having the biggest problem we have is having an integrated approach amongst the stakeholders within cultural heritage, let alone start comparing with others. So the answer is no. Unless something is from ivory or it is looted, I wouldn't know about it. The first leg of your question, I forgot now. What can you? Mm-hmm. Greedy people are everywhere, that's for sure. So there are greedy people everywhere. However, when you tighten legislation, and I think that the awareness has increased with Iraq and Syria in many European countries, and the information we have now is that a lot of them are going to China and Russia right now, but not exclusively. Any more questions? Yes. Well, not yet, but I hope we will. But I think that what has happened, there's a lot more sensitivity on the subject now. And I believe that the US, you have passed a new law where the return of relics or ancestors to the indigenous communities is easier right now. Is that correct? Sorry? Mm-hmm. So I think that when it comes to relics, it's a little bit more difficult, but technology has come a long way. For example, last week we had a group, a production team from London that went to Cyprus because they're making a documentary about the life of Jesus. So they wanted to see the route that St. Lazarus, I don't know if you're aware, but St. Lazarus is believed that after he rose from the dead, he went to Cyprus and he spent 30 years as the Bishop of Kition. And Oxford University was with them because they have a new technique to analyze relics. So I'm sure you have a lot of experts here. But so the issue, I don't think it is the expertise to identify the DNA that is the problem here. It's more where the ownership is. But in cases where it is so emotional in communities, perhaps it shouldn't go to one family, or it should be in the community. I don't know. It's not an area where I'm expert in, but I would be happy to discuss and think with you of creative ways where you can make both parties happy, but that's not my expertise. But I do watch and I do know that you have passed this law and progress has been made. Any other questions?
Well, thank you very much for most inspirational